Hey everyone, Warwick's here. So, did a video a couple of days ago on the Guardian Druid changes and kind of the changes they did to the talent tree and my thoughts on them. Go check out that video if you haven't already. I'll put it in up there in the card so that you can go check that one out. It's a longer video, about 30 minutes of me just talking about the Guardian Druid tree, but you guys know that I'm super passionate about this spec. Uh, Still haven't forgotten Monk, but definitely very passionate about this spec, and so. But Blizzard announced a few more changes yesterday to kind of make some small corrections. Nothing major here, but I just wanted to touch on them real quick. And then I also wanted to go ahead and talk about what are we looking at in terms of the potential pre-patch talents. Once I think these should hit pre-patch next week or on Tuesday when the reset happens, Wednesday for EU. And then also kind of looking forward to potential level 70 builds. So I just kind of wanted to do like a build video for this for Guardian Druid. I know I've been doing a lot of Guardian Druid videos. There is a Feral one that's in the works that I'm working on, kind of talking about the state of Feral Druid and just kind of what my experience has been now that I've done a few Mythic Plus dungeons and did a raid on it. We just did a heroic Castle Nathir run just to let people test out everything, start gearing up some new mains that are coming into Dragonflight. Mine's almost 300 eye level, so I don't need any gear, but we're going to take a look at it. So first off, let's look at the kind of general Druid changes. Brutal Slash just got a small tooltip update to kind of show that it awards a combo point. Nothing big there. And also usable in bear form for some reason. Doesn't make sense to me, but is what it is. Brutal Slash being usable in bear form for Feral Druid is going to be interesting if you switch to bear form for like a soak mechanic or something like that. Scintillating Moonlight, basically they tweaked the value of it. It says it's supposed to only be 1%. Instead now, like, this change needs a little bit of confirmation on this. Let me go ahead and look at the Scintillating Moonlight. So it still shows in the Wowhead guide that it's 2 and 4%. This one shows that it might be only 1 and 2%. If that's the case, then they just need to make this a 1-point talent. That's just a 2% reduction at that point, because 1% changes for a talent point is ridiculous. They shouldn't do that. Like, the minimum should be 2%. So if that's the case, you just make Scintillating Moonlight a 1-point talent, in my opinion. So still have to figure out what's going on this one. Looks like they just did a small tooltip update to it, basically. Except Brutal Slash got that. Scintillating Moonlight doesn't look like it's really changed at all. So we'll see. The big one here that I want to talk about is Tooth and Claw. So in the original build, Tooth and Claw was a 2-point talent, which this has been updated. It's now been updated on Wowhead Calculator, but notice everything here is a 1-point talent. This was a 2-point talent. And I reached out on Twitter to the devs, didn't get a response, but clearly this was something that they had already had on their minds. I'll respond to the I'll follow up on that later after this video, but basically this was a 2-point talent, which basically killed this whole section right here. That has now been corrected to make Tooth and Claw back to the original 1-point talent that it was when it was up here. I think that's a pretty strong change in and of itself. And then they also did a update to Ursoc's Endurance, which is a talent we weren't really using anyways. No build that I've really seen has been using it, which buffed it from a 1-second increase to a 2-second increase. There might be some really hardcore defensive builds that take this. Like if you don't like Gory Fur, there is a chance you could do Ursoc's Endurance. Like I think there is a potential argument for Gory Fur not to be taken, and you said one Ursoc's Endurance, because instead of you're talking about 25% reduction, so you're talking from 40 to 30 rage versus getting every Iron Fur is now 9 seconds versus 7. I think there is an argument for Ursoc's Endurance to potentially be there. I think it's going to end up just needing to be worked out mathematically on the defensive side. So I think I'll probably sit down and think about, but I don't know if this is going to make Ursoc's Endurance a usable talent. It might. Like I said, I think there's a real argument, especially since now you don't need Gory Fur to get this side of the tree, because Survival of the Fittest and then this choice node are pretty much not taken in a lot of builds right now. So I think there's some potential here for some Iron Fur layering on a defensive scale with Ursoc's Endurance into layered main, uh, to get the 2 stacks at 9 seconds, and then, potentially buffing your armor by an additional 4% beyond that. So there's some real potential to build like a very tanky build. The problem is do you do enough damage? But that's where you go get something like Flashing Claws, or you grab the Maul talents for raid purposes. Although I would argue that, as I said here, Vulnerable Flesh still being mandatory, I think it just needs to do something else. I think one thing that would be really good for this to do, and I think I've talked about this before, in the last video, Vulnerable Flesh, making Maul also strike additional targets when it's on like a Tooth and Claw proc or something like that would be really cool. Something along those lines, just to make Maul more usable in AoE situations. Anyways, the other thing that we're looking at with this spell is Bark Skin. It also increases the duration of Bark Skin by 2 more seconds. So I've got Bark Skin right here. You see me click on it by accident a couple times. So right now it does 20. It's a 20% DR that lasts 8 seconds on a minute cooldown. It's a very good cooldown. It also enables things in your tree like brambles. Okay. Also enables things like a small absorb shield when you use it here with matted fur, which you are taking basically in most builds that I've seen. But the thing about the duration increase I find potentially interesting, potentially kind of useless, is the fact that Bark Skin already gets a 4-second increase at the very top of the tree here. So you're already getting a 12-second Bark Skin, and now you're getting a 14-second Bark Skin, which with brambles, potentially, 14 seconds of getting, 0.06% damage from each attack. You absorb and reflect that, and then it does 2.6208% of attack power nature damage to all enemies every second. Like, I think the reflect probably needs to be a little bit stronger personally, but, between that and then you have the duration increase, this duration increase, this matted fur talent, like all of a sudden there is a real chance that that Bark Skin can become pretty potent cooldown to where, the second chart, and if you take reinforced fur, you're now getting a 25% DR on a 1-minute cooldown. That potentially makes this a very powerful cooldown. So there is some potential here to, if you're really looking for defense and you don't use gory fur, maybe you go something like this. So we grab brambles, Ursine Adept, of course we got to grab Mangle, and then you do something like this for this section of the tree. And then you go here, which opens up the middle of the tree. Say you're doing Mythic Plus, so you grab that side of the tree. You're kind of looking at something along these lines. Oh, and then you need a point here, so we'll grab Soul of the Forest, because it's just the best point available. And then you go something along these lines. Obviously, you grab all the Moonfire talents. You grab Incarn and Ursoc's Guidance, and then you have 2 points left to spend that you could put almost anywhere that you want at that point. You could put 2 points into Vulnerable Flesh. You could put a point into Vicious Cycle for like a Tyrannical Week. You could grab a point in Blood Frenzy and then grab the second point in ISI. You grab, Blood Frenzy, Rage of the Sleeper. Like, there's all sorts of possibilities here that are going to allow you to have a very powerful setup here. So we'll look into potential builds here in just a minute, but I think now Ursoc's Endurance with this buff to now 2 seconds becomes potentially a very viable pick over Gory Fur, because I think these are the talents that are kind of competing with each other right now. Basically, you have to pick one of these two. Potentially, you can skip both, but you really kind of need one of these two to get down to layered main, although you're going to take Berserk no matter what. So that's the changes. I think this is the biggest one, changing this from 2 to 1. I think, believe it or not, that 1 point change opens up a lot of build paths. The Ursoc's Endurance change, I think, is really interesting. I think it makes it potentially a pick that can now be something to be considered for like a very heavily defensive build, and to let another proc not to have to track with Gory Fur, and then go from there. And just real quick to note, Moonkin, while you're in Moonkin form, you get 10% extra damage to spells. I build Moonkin Weaving on my Guardian tree with the intent in raid that I'll be using it as an off-tanking type situation. If I have to go more than I would say more than 20 or 30 seconds without having to tank, then I will switch into Moonkin form. I also grab it for Mythic Plus purposes to get Hibernate, Typhoon, and then of course Ursol's to get this mob control. That is going to become potentially very important in some of the dungeons I've already seen, and a little bit of Mythic Plus testing that I do, that I've done rather. That there's very key moments for these talents to be useful. I don't get to do a lot of Mythic Plus beta testing because it happens on the weekends when I have my son, so kind of tough for me to get in and get some keys done on the weekends. So, but shout outs to Moonkins. Get their Vulnerable Flesh, now a Guardian spell like that. That's basically a tooltip change. Like I said, I really wish they would do something with that talent. It's just kind of whatever. Anyways, so that's the update on the changes, guys. Appreciate you sticking with me through that little bit of tangents that I got onto. I didn't script this. I'm basically doing this right now with you guys. Sorry. So let's talk about some pre-patch builds. Now, your class tree, you kind of pick whatever you want here. Like the major ones are going to be these. You want to grab Guardian talents. I grab these just because it makes a little bit more of effective. Makes it a little bit more effective. You can obviously grab these 3 resto talents if you need to be your curse removal for your team. Either way, you're going to go grab Nurturing Instinct, but then you have to grab Natural Recovery to get Sunfire versus extra range. So you're kind of picking your utility. Do you want to be a little bit easier to heal and make your frenzied regens better, or do you want a little bit more range so that maybe there's an enemy on the outside of the circle from your thrash or your swipes that get hit instead? Both of them have viability. It just kind of depends on your group. If you don't have a curse spell, then you're probably going to want to take Remove Corruption if you know there's going to be curses in the dungeon. Otherwise, you just kind of, I would say, take Astral Influence. Like if you run with a mage, you can remove curses, or you run with a Resto Druid that has Cleanse or something like that, then you don't need Remove Corruption. And I would go more this Astral Influence side. But if you run with like a Monk Healer, for example, and you don't have a mage in your group, then you're going to have to be the Remove Corruption. So you kind of, these top points right here, like this whole section of the tree right through here is all going to depend on your group comp, honestly. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to assume we're taking this side of the tree. And then, of course, we grab Incap Roar, we grab Lucaris, we grab Renewal, grab Ursol's, and then kind of your last 5 points you can kind of spend anywhere you want. If you're with like a Mystery Monk that has mana issues, you can grab an Innervate. Remember, you can't cast this in form, so you'll basically need to wait for like a period where there's not a lot of damage going out. Say, for example, like Halkias' Beam, for example. So like there's a phase where you're all basically dodging a mechanic and you're not actually doing a lot of damage and your healer needs an Innervate. That's when you would pop it. And for the like millionth time, please add Innervate to Ursine Adept and to Cat form for Feral Druids. Blizzard, please. You can grab Stampeding Roar if you want. You can grab Heart of the Wild. 2 points of Well-Honed Instincts I think will be good because you get a free Frenzied Regen every 90 seconds when you fall below health. For Guardian, I wouldn't take this. For Feral, there's a real chance that you would take Protector of the Pack. You can obviously go Innervate into Nature's Vigil if you think that cooldown is worth it. You can go grab you can do something like that, but obviously you need these points. So your last 2 really. So you can grab these 2, put 2 points here, put a point here, put a point here. Like honestly, these last 2 points or whatever. Just don't take Ursine Vigor. It's bad. You can grab Mob Control, like whatever you want. I probably go do something like this in my build paths, just because that's kind of what I think is going to be needed for mob control purposes. But if you have a lot of control and you don't need a Hibernate or a Typhoon, then you can obviously come grab Minute Roar, you grab Well-Honed Instincts, whatever the case may be. But we're going to look at pre-patch builds. So right now, obviously, we're going to stop at level 59. So I think the top of your tree is going to look like this. Obviously, you grab Innate Resolve, you grab Berserk. And I think right here is where you have your choice. Now with this Ursoc's Endurance buff, you can have your choice. Whether you have a little bit more Rage, or you just have a stronger, longer rather, defensives. I think you can pick either one of these because ultimately you just need the points to basically get down. So like for Mythic Plus, I would say go this route, and then you're going to want to grab Layered Mane. And then I would say grab Reinforced Fur here, because you need it to get to Fury of Nature, and then you can also grab this. And then now you need basically 2 points to spend. So you can actually grab both if you wanted. I don't think you need to do that just because Soul of the Forest to me is very important, especially as we get into level 70 content and you get your 4-piece bonus where Mangle on a Gore proc does hit 3, I think it's 3 targets, maybe 4 targets. So Mangle doing more damage is always going to be good there. I'm going to say grab Ursoc's Endurance. You can grab Gory Fur. I think this is completely up to preference, but I think you have to ultimately get one or both. You could also just go grab Vulnerable Flesh into Tooth and Claw. That's another potential build. And then you go here, and then I would finish off with that right there. Or, I'd finish off with like this. So that puts us at level 59. Yeah, you need this to spend to be the 20th point. So, yeah, I'd go something like this. You could even skip Circle of Life and Death to get Twin Moonfire. I think that's up to you, honestly. So this kind of last point is flexible. So I think right now for like level 60 builds, so let's see, let's remove. Actually, let me just do this. All right, so we got these main talents. So we're gonna go. Let's say you have to be your. You don't have to be your curse spell. So we'll grab that. You can skip Wild Charge if you want. I love Wild Charge. I just like the mobility. So I'm gonna do that. We'll skip Matted Fur for now. Grab those points. Need this to get Ursol's. Yeah, we'll go ahead and grab Matted Fur. And then, of course, you grab that. I think Renewal is too important to get. So you get Ursol's. And then you get Incap Roar. And that's your required level 60. So I think this is kind of like your Mythic Plus pre-patch build. Again, this side of the tree is going to depend on if you need to be the curse spot, in which case, actually, scratch that. I forgot to grab these 3 points, so I got to figure out where to get it. Let's remove Incap Roar. Let's remove Ursol's. We got to remove this. So I think this is your level 60 pre-patch build. This magical damage and healing increased by 6% does affect Moonfire. So you're getting a 6% damage boost here, 10% damage boost here, 20% damage boost here. So you're talking 36% extra damage on Moonfire across the board. So it's kind of too powerful to let go. So I think this is kind of your Mythic Plus build. For raids, I'd probably go along this path. And then you do grab Circle of Life and Death. Something like that. 'Cause raid, unless it's... And then you basically switch out Circle for Twin Moonfire. If it's like a 2-target boss fight, Lords of Dread, for example. It's a good 2-target fight that we have currently. But then as you get to level 70, of course, you're going to want to go longer. Skipping Incarn, yes, you are. But for raid purposes, I don't think you need a 30-second one. Or a 30-second duration cooldown. I just don't see the value in it right now. So these are kind of the build paths that I see for pre-patch for both Raid and Mythic Plus. Basically, you're switching out these 3 points for these 3 points. You could even, like if Tooth and Claw were still here, you could go Vicious Cycle down and skip Vulnerable Flesh completely, which is kind of what I wish they would do. I really wish they would have just swapped these, but with the fact that they added this connection, they could have left these talents the way they were, and I could have gone Tooth and Claw, Vicious Cycle down to Berserk. You could do that route. You could also take this point out to grab Twin Moonfire. You could take this point out to and you get something like, you could go Vicious Cycle, you could get your second point ISI, you could get Gory Fur, you could put a point into Flashing Claws just to give you a little bit more damage, and then you do something like this. Where you just get their original Incarn. You could do something like that as well. I think that's completely possible. Now for level 70 builds, we'll go ahead and focus on the raid side of things. We're going to get the extra 5 points now. So we're going to go ahead and grab this Berserk because I think it's going to be needed. I do think you're going to grab Incarn and the Guidance here because it's going to make this roughly a 2-minute cooldown. And then I think you go something like this. Rage of the Sleeper is going to be completely optional. I think you grab Blood Frenzy, and then you make a choice here. You can grab a second ISI if you need it. You can go grab Vicious Cycle for raid purposes to help kind of with this. I think this is probably going to be the best investment of your point. So something like this for level 70 I think would be good. Mythic Plus, again, it's just going to be something like this. Now, there is a potential build here where you actually kind of do this, where you just grab the Moonfire talents, and then you come down here and grab Ursock's Fury into Rend and Tear. I've seen this build be out there as well. I don't hate the idea of this build. I think for Mythic Plus, there's some value in it, because then you're leaning kind of into a Thrash Moonfire spam. And you get a little bit of Absorb Shield, you get the 6% DR, plus you're getting 14 seconds on Bark Skin, plus a 9-second Iron Fur. It's a very defensive build, and I think you could potentially see it become a thing in high keys. We'll have to see still, but I think overall this is a build that has some potential. I want to play with it in a key situation. Hopefully I can maybe get in Sunday evening, after I get my weekend with my little one. But I don't know if this build's going to be able to outmuscle Incarn, unfortunately, just because Incarn also does give you 30% HP. So it's a real strong defensive. I'm also a big fan of Rage of the Sleeper. I like having something in between those Berserk windows. Obviously, Barkskin now with these changes and this setup is going to be very powerful, very, quite long as well. So that is a possibility. The other thing that you could do is take away this point in Reinforced Fur and, maybe go something along this line. But I just don't see that being viable. I think Reinforced Fur, unfortunately, does have its place. So there's definitely more build options here now that they've done updated talent trees. It's going to be basically quibbling over personal preferences, I think, for the most part. Do you want a little bit more of a defensive build, or do you want to go a little bit more aggressive? I personally tend to lean towards a more defensive build as I'm learning content, learning dungeons, going to be learning the routes as I do that in Mythic Plus. For raid purposes, I'm going to be DPSing raid most likely, but I am a backup tank in case one of our tanks can't make it. So I'm going to be keeping up to date with the raid builds and stuff like that. But overall, these changes, minor. The Tooth and Claw one, I think, was just so big. I think it was just a bug that I think they just fixed. But as I said before, I still think there's more to do with this tree. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get that until 10.1 at the earliest. And they just really need to start tuning some things. They gave Maul a massive buff. I think Swipe needs a buff in damage. I think that Maul needs something to make it usable in AoE, so that something like Tooth and Claw can become a potential AoE focused type thing as well. But for the most part, I'm a little bit more satisfied with these trees now that Tooth and Claw is back down to 1 point. I like the potential build paths that we have here. There's a real potential for Incarn to not be in your build. You could be just go Berserk and deal with it for being a 3-minute cooldown, and you focus things like Barkskin and Rage of the Sleeper as your real defensive tools. So there's some real nice possibilities here at the bottom of this tree. Unfortunately, I think this left side of the tree needs some help. It just feels very weak in comparison now to the Moonfire talents on this side of the tree. I think Rage of the Sleeper needs a little bit of a buff to make it better. I think the Reflect needs to be a little bit stronger. I think if that is the case, then all of a sudden it becomes a true capstone talent. Rend and Tear probably could maybe use a buff. Untamed Savagery, I just don't understand why it's here. If anything, I think it should be a choice node with Flashing Claws. But either way, I think Untamed Savagery just ultimately ends up not being taken in most situations. I know there are some people that are taking it in some builds, but I just don't. Like, you're talking 25% damage on one ability versus 6% damage on all of your abilities. Like, you kind of have to math that out. I think Untamed Savagery only goes if in farm content or on stuff that you're very comfortable tanking. Like, say, hey, your push level is like 20, 22, something like that, and you're just doing 15 keys to help out some friends with their push, fill their vaults, stuff like that, then maybe Untamed Savagery has a place. But beyond that, I just think if you're going down this side of the tree, Dream of Scenarios doesn't really have a place in this tree, in my opinion. Pulverize is just not great, in my opinion. Sacrificing 2 stacks of Thrash on a 45-second cooldown just doesn't seem all that fun to me. Whereas this side of the tree is like loaded, like literally 1, 2, 3, all 4 of these talents are just massive influences on your playstyle. And you're just going to have rage out the wazoo on this, which is why, like, to me, something like Gory Fur all of a sudden maybe not become viable, because you're getting rage off Galactic Guardian, you're getting rage off your Thrash, and then you're getting more rage off of your Mangle, because it's doing, does more damage on the bleeding targets. Generates 5 more rage here as well through Soul of the Forest. Like, to me, rage generation is not going to be the issue. The issue is pure damage at this point, and I think a lot of those issues are tuning wise. I haven't seen any logs of what's going on with raid testing. I'm gonna go look those up, but I think Guardian Druid is actually in a little bit better of a place than I think most of us think. I still think there's still some very fundamental problems with the tree. I'm not denying that. I'm not ignoring that. The fact that these 2 talents right here in particular are so heavily connected to the Moonfire talents, yet don't connect to them in any form or fashion. There's just a massive oversight. Like, if they took Soul of the Forest in this Berserk node and went bloop, bloop, and then, or took Berserk, moved it here, Soul of the Forest here, and then moved this talent here, all of a sudden, or this talent here, made it 1 point, like, all of a sudden we have this, or even Circle of Life and Death, move it here, put Berserk here, put Soul of the Forest here, put Blood Frenzy right here, and then you make this a full Moonfire talent with this changing to Orbit Breaker. All of a sudden you have a very heavily Moonfire influenced play. Move Rage of the Sleeper over here, take Rend and Tear, move it up, remove Dream of Cenarius out completely. Now you have like a very Thrash ball type oriented side of the tree, a very Moonfire oriented side of the tree, and then you have your stronger cooldown middle portion here. I still think ultimately this needs to be buffed in some form or fashion to make it a viable pick against the Moonfire build, but just little changes like that I think all of a sudden make this tree much improved. But like I said, I think Guardian Druid might actually be a little bit underrated even by myself, but we'll have to see. We'll have to get the data, as I say. Anyways, guys, that's the end of this video. Another 30-minute rant or so on Guardian Druid. I apologize. I love this spec. I could talk about it all day. But we're going to cut it off here. I'm going to get ready to do my Feral video. So until the next video, I hope you're all staying safe. I hope you're all enjoying yourself. You're having fun. And I'll see you all in the next video.